I had an inherited belief in God that I got from my parents, Jesus and the Bible, from my earliest memories. Yet when I reached my late teens, and like I mentioned last night, it was probably about the time my frontal lobes began to attach. I began to think more abstractly, and I began to ask questions that it had never occurred to me to ask before, like, how do we know there's a God again? Or why do we believe the Bible is more inspired or more true than any other book? Or why is our particular branch of Christianity true and we can't fellowship with the Foursquare people down the church or the Catholics or the Lutherans or the Methodists? In fact, we were so separatistic and exclusive that the churches I grew up in, at least as a child, I might have misunderstood, but I really got the impression that we were the last true believers and everyone else had fallen out of the way. That was at least the impression I got. And even though we moved a lot, my dad was always able to find those types of believers wherever he went. And so he found those sorts of believers to fellowship with. But we were very much into separation. We wouldn't fellowship with people who had false doctrine or who fellowship with people who had false doctrine. So I called it like a second and third degree of separation. Even like the good people at Liberty University, we weren't allowed to hang out with them because they were neo-fundamentalist. And a neo-fundamentalist, even though they had correct fundamental doctrine and took the scripture seriously and were orthodox, they hung out with neo-evangelicals. And even though neo-evangelicals had sound doctrine, they hung out with neo-orthodox, that's where it started to get a little iffy. And the neo-orthodox would hang out with anyone. And so we couldn't even hang out with the neo-fundamentalists because they hung out with people who hung out with people who hung out with people we shouldn't be hanging out with. So it got very involved. And it gave you kind of this like Bastion mentality, like put up the walls, protect yourselves from the world, come out from amongst them, be a separate and holy people. And that's how I would kind of describe the difference, at least between the brand of fundamentalism I was brought up in. It was more of a fortress mentality, like the line is drawn here, no compromise, where I see evangelicals as more wanting to be like salt and light out into the community. But as often happens, it gets blurred, and often you find it's like, well, are you evangelizing the world or have you become the world? And it becomes a very tricky balancing act for a lot of churches. And you especially see that in like the emergent church movement and things of that nature, where they're very effective at reaching the world, but it's like, where did the gospel go? Or do you even know what the gospel is anymore? And I'm not trying to pick on anyone in particular, it's just everyone has their own strengths and weaknesses, and the fundamentalists were very good at not being tainted by the things of the world, but they could be very weak at connecting or reaching the world.